If there's one thing, and there aren't many things that we can all agree on when it comes to video games, it's that boy, there are a lot of them. No matter your preferred genre, game length, or mechanics, we're all bound to miss out on a gem here and there. That's perhaps no truer than when we're dealing with open world games, which often, but not always, take a lot of time to get through. Nobody would blame you if you opted to pick up a sure thing like Skyrim over the games on this list, but I'm betting if you have played any of these, you can attest to the fantastic gaming experiences that can be found beyond the front page of digital storefronts on your platform of choice. Now, obviously, inevitably, some of you will have played these games, but if you haven't, our title holds up, and if you have, hopefully we can have a good little nostalgia trip in the comments. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are the 10 best open world video games you didn't play. Number 10, EASTSHADE. EASTSHADE is a combat-free open-world adventure game that's achingly pretty. The game kicks off with you shipwrecked on potentially the world's prettiest island, inhabited by a bunch of humanoid animals and other critters. While you won't be battling it out, you will be doing a good handful of other things, like exploring, crafting, creating paintings, completing side quests, and a few more, well, eccentric activities, like solving a crime and playing matchmaker between a couple of bears. It's an odd little game that won't be to everyone's tastes, which makes it easy to overlook, but if you can get past the technical stumbles and it sounds like your thing, it's a rare gem of a gaming experience. Number 9, BIOMUTANT. Another great open world game with an eye-catching art style is action RPG BIOMUTANT. Trading out the all-too-common color palette of grey, brown, and more grey, BIOMUTANT instead decides to paint its open world and colorful characters in vivid hues. While some people found it a little rough around the edges, it earned praise for the flexibility with which you can build your character, the ability to blend playstyles, nuanced RPG mechanics, and letting you choose what kind of fuzzy anthropomorphic mammal you want to be and how you'll treat those around you. This one doesn't reinvent the wheel, and as a result, its critical success wasn't much to write home about, but the combat is slick and satisfying, there's plenty of quests to cross off for that dopamine hit, and the world is just really pretty and fun to be a part of. There's a ton of different skills and abilities to spec into for the RPG fans, dynamic action-oriented combat for the action buffs, and an adorable protagonist for those of us who just want to say, "Aw, look how fuzzy." If you ignored this one because it didn't get gangbuster review scores, you may want to give it another chance. Number 8, PATHOLOGIC 2. There's a few reasons this one might have passed you by. It's a sequel, it's brutally unforgiving, we're dealing with a heavy dose of weird, and it's more than a little spooky. If you can deal with that though, PATHOLOGIC 2 is a heck of a game you don't want to miss. The 2019 adventure survival game casts you as a man who once left the strange town and has now returned to find it plague-ridden and strewn with bodies. You'll need to manage your time as you'll be playing on a clock, and there is a nuanced decision-making system that can have dire consequences. NPCs will give you quests, you'll need to balance your resources, manage your hunger and health, and unravel the story to get to a satisfying endpoint. PATHOLOGIC 2 might be extremely difficult as survival games go, but it's rewarding when you discover a path forward, and its mysteries are incredibly enticing. Some players were admittedly put off by its bugs and difficulty, but if that sounds like something you can handle, its positives are more than worth it. Number 7, The Forgotten City. Given this one began as a mod for Skyrim, it's a really impressive standalone game. In this really clever RPG, you find yourself in an ancient Roman city, cut off from the rest of the world and, it seems, the rest of time. You'll take on various side quests from the city's other inhabitants as you learn more about your predicament, unravel the mysteries of the strange place, and try to figure out why everybody turns to gold when somebody breaks a specific set of laws. This one easily could have flown under your radar, as the original mod was made by just a single developer, and even the full game was only made by a small Australian studio. Despite all that, the result is pretty darn special. There are a multitude of endings to achieve depending on your choices and how much of the story you unraveled, and piecing together the puzzle as you go is immensely satisfying. If you're one of those who didn't try it out for one reason or another, and you're a fan of unique open worlds with enthralling narratives, this one will be right up your alley. Number 6, The PATHLESS. This is an open world game that you might not have played because it came out at the end of 2020 in an absolutely packed release period. If you're anything like me, you might remember The PATHLESS when it debuted at the Game Awards in 2018 with a very cool trailer, and perhaps you also didn't even realize that it launched. Which honestly can happen when you bring out an indie game in November, the busiest release month of the year. Those who did play it though could tell you the PATHLESS did a pretty darn good job of delivering on its promises. The game has a gorgeous aesthetic, satisfying traversal controls, and smooth hunting mechanics. The dashing mechanic that enables you to move faster the more you shoot targets to maintain momentum is pretty cool in action, and the world design is an absolute treat. Though the game was criticized for being repetitive in some sections, boss fights were praised for their intensity and level of challenge, the soundtrack is lovely, and the vivid colors and lighting used throughout the map are enchanting. Number 5. Gothic 2. I'm gonna guess you fall into one of two categories here. You either haven't played Gothic 2 and our title holds up, or you have played Gothic 2 and think more people really should play Gothic 2. This is a game you might have missed since it wasn't a universal critical success compared to some other early 2000s RPGs. But for those willing to put a little more work in to wade into the challenging signpost-free game world, Gothic 2 is really something special. Made by Piranha Bytes, who also created Risen and Elix, two more games that could be right at home on this list, Gothic 2 is a perfect example of Eurojank. It's a genre that doesn't appeal to everyone, but these rough around the edges experiences can be oozing with charm, dozens of different mechanics, and inspired game worlds peppered with interesting characters. Gothic 2 may indeed be 2 decades old now, but if you missed out on it, it could well be one of the best fantasy role-playing experiences you never played. Number 4. The Saboteur. In 2009, Pandemic Studios released The Saboteur, an action-adventure set in Paris in the 1940s. The open-world game casts you as an Irishman fighting for a French resistance group in World War II, though you engage by sneaking about and sabotaging behind the scenes instead of through all-out combat. The intriguing art style is also gorgeous, as the open world is initially coated in a black and white filter, which falls away, revealing the natural colors beneath once you liberate each of Paris's boroughs and its surroundings. Beyond its compelling, unique qualities that set it apart in the genre, The Saboteur also delivers super enjoyable moment-to-moment gameplay. Despite all that, it actually didn't see any wild critical or commercial success, so it could have easily passed you by. But hey, it's on your radar now. Number 3. GREEDFALL. Now, the last time I compiled a list of RPGs that were sorely underrated which more people should have played, I did not put GREEDFALL on it, and we're not going to make that mistake again. This is another unique game that might be overlooked simply because it isn't from a AAA studio. The action RPG was released in 2019 by French studio Spiders and published by Focus Home. The setting blends fantasy and 17th century colonialism, which was music to the ears of some and off-putting to others, resulting in a bunch of people giving the game a miss. Under the hood though, there's well-balanced Witcher-esque combat, a gorgeous game world to explore, and genuinely satisfying RPG progression alongside a healthy dose of challenge, particularly in boss encounters. This is yet another game that you could have missed out on if you saw 1 or 2 bad reviews, but if it sounds like your thing, don't be put off. Number 2. IMMORTALS FENYX Rising. If there's one thing we're trying to convey in this list, it's that just because a few major outlets may not have loved a game doesn't mean you won't. And IMMORTALS FENYX Rising is another great example of that. Cast aside by a good number of people for being Breath of the Wild light, a good number of people didn't even try their hand at this one on reputation alone, which is a darn shame because there's a pretty entertaining game in here. It may not have garnered the scores for you to run out and pick it up as a must-play, but FENYX Rising has a grand, colourful world replete with mythical beasts to best, intricate puzzles to solve, and a story to unravel. The combat is satisfyingly complex, there are powers to utilise, and unlike a lot of these very serious RPGs, FENYX Rising isn't afraid to have a bit more fun with itself. Dialogue is often amusing, and the whole narrative plays out as a story being told to Zeus by Prometheus. The humor is a really lovely touch, as is the vivid, oversaturated game world because, as we said earlier, we've really had enough of grey. If you played Breath of the Wild and wanted more of that vibe, but in a smaller package, FENYX Rising gets the job done. Number 1. Mad Max. Mad Max is such a bizarre case. I remember everyone talking about this game before it came out, and then it seemed like next to no one played it because it wasn't universally critically acclaimed upon release. That remains true, but it's a massive shame because the one person I know who did play it absolutely loved it, and if that happens to be you in your friendship group, I'm assuming you agree with me. The 2015 action-adventure was made by Just Cause developer Avalanche Studios, and while it was criticized by some reviewers for having a lackluster story, there's a lot to love in there too. The compelling world design and sprawling sandbox offers up the ideal playground for vehicular combat, exploring, and action encounters. In particular, the game was also praised for its exciting weather effects, impressive map scale, and unique regions. Perhaps most importantly, Avalanche just did an excellent job of bringing the enthralling and violent world of Mad Max to a video game experience. Though many gave it a miss because of its uneven review scores, those who vibed with its strengths are really glad they gave it a go. That's the end of our list, but do let me know down in that comment section if you can think of any other open world video games that not enough people have played. As always, I've been Jess from WhatCulture. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. If you like, you can come say hi to me on my Twitter account where I'm at Jess McDonald, but make sure that you stay tuned to us here for plenty more great gaming lists.